Assalamu alaikum. So my presentation today is going to be about the evidence for evolution from molecular biology. And the esteemed Naseem Mehdi Saab has already shown you that evolution is absolutely consistent with the Holy Quran. And now if any of you have any doubts left, it's my job to show you that evolution really is a fact. And now in 10 minutes, I can barely cover the surface of the evidence that there is for evolution from even just molecular biology. But today I'll share with you some 3 compelling examples that will hopefully be able to drive the point home that evolution really is a fact. But before I do that, I want to tell you a story that kind of puts all of my examples in perspective. Now there were these 2 students. They had just finished taking an exam, and they handed it in, and the professor was grading that exam in his office. And after reading their 2 papers, he realized that these 2 students must have cheated off one another. So he immediately calls these 2 students in and says, look, I know that at least one of you copied off of the other. So if you confess to me right now, then I'll be a little more lenient. And now the student that had cheated, he points out, no, look, we're actually both roommates, and we study together. So it's only natural that we gave similar answers to the exact same questions. And the professor says, that's all understandable, but that's not how I know that you cheated. The way I know that you cheated is that you both spelled the exact same 6 words incorrectly in the exact same way. And now as soon as the professor said this, he realized, the students realized that they were caught. Because there's only one way to spell a word correctly, and there are an infinite number of ways to spell words incorrectly. So for the exact same 6 spelling mistakes to occur in 2 essays independently, the chance of that is 0. In this case, they must have had a common origin. In this case, one student must have copied those mistakes off of the other student. So what does that have to do with evolution, you might ask? The answer is that evolution acts on DNA. DNA is the thing that encodes for all life. And like the essays that these students wrote, DNA is made up of letters, specifically 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. And what scientists have found over the years after sequencing the DNA of a whole bunch of different species is that the DNA of all species also has spelling mistakes in it. And just like the mistakes that these 2 students made in their essays, these spelling mistakes demonstrate that these species must have had a common origin. And to show you what I mean by that, here's my first example. This is the case of vitamin C. Now, vitamin C is an essential nutrient. All animals need it for their bodies to function correctly. And the interesting thing is that most animals can produce their vitamin C on their own. But humans, on the other hand, we can't do that. Because of that, we have to consume vitamin C from our diets, from foods like oranges. And the reason that we can't produce our own vitamin C is that we have spelling mistakes in our DNA. Now, most other animals, they have 5 enzymes, a series of 5 enzymes that produce vitamin C and allows them to not have to eat that from external sources. And for humans, though, we have the genes that encode for all of those 5 enzymes, but only 4 out of 5 of those work, the first 4 out of 5. The last enzyme in the pathway that produces vitamin C, called GLO, the gene for that in humans has so many spelling mistakes in it that it does not work correctly, and therefore we can't produce vitamin C. Now, creationists might argue that there's no evidence for evolution, because after all, maybe God just wanted us to have the chance to enjoy oranges. But the argument against that is that we're not the only animal with this vitamin C gene, GLO gene, broken. In fact, here in the tree above, it shows all the ones colored in light gray are also examples of other animals that have the exact same GLO gene messed up, and because of that, they can't produce vitamin C. And not only do they have the same gene messed up, but if you go one step further, actually look at the sequence of that gene. That's shown in this kind of simplified diagram in the bottom. And what it shows is that there are 12 parts to that gene. And you can kind of think of that as 12 words in the gene. And what the diagram shows with the X's is that in all of these species that have this GLO gene messed up, 8 out of 12 of those words are misspelled. And because of that, the gene doesn't work. But not just any 8 out of 12, the exact same 8 out of 12 every single time. So just like in the case of the 2 students who had the exact same 6 spelling mistakes demonstrating that they must have copied off one another, these 8 spelling mistakes in the exact same place, in the exact same gene, could not have simply emerged by chance in all of these different species. The way it must have happened is that a common ancestor, one that was before all of these species we know today, had all of these spelling mistakes in its DNA, and that has since passed them on to all of the species that have evolved from that. So that's evolution. Now, another really similar case is the case of beta globulin. Now, beta globulin is a component of hemoglobin. And as many of you know, hemoglobin is the protein in our blood that carries oxygen from our lungs to the rest of our tissues. And humans, we have a bunch of different versions of beta globulin that we use at various times in our lives. And the genes for all of those different versions of beta globulin are clustered together in one area in our DNA. And that's shown at the top figure. And as you can see, there's 6 genes there that encode for 6 different versions of beta globulin. But the interesting thing is that right in the middle, the fourth one in the sequence that's colored white, that one is actually not a gene. It's a pseudogene. And what I mean by that is that it looks like a gene. Its sequence is very similar to the rest of the genes, but because of key spelling mistakes, that gene doesn't work correctly. So it's called a pseudogene. This is kind of like the GLO gene, which I just talked about. And again, this is not unique to humans. In fact, other primates like chimpanzees and gorillas, they have this exact same mistake. They have a cluster of 6 beta globulin genes with the 4th one in the sequence, a pseudogene, that's messed up. And again, you can take this one step further. You can look at the actual sequence of that pseudogene. And that's what's shown on the bottom figure. And what it shows is that there are 6 spelling mistakes that mess that gene up, which make it into a pseudogene. And those spelling mistakes essentially mix up start and stop signals, and that messes up the gene completely. And as you can see, the areas where those mutations are, they're marked in that figure. And the important thing is that these exact same 6 spelling mistakes in the exact same places are found in the exact same places in a whole bunch of different species, including chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans as well. And again, this demonstrates that this could not simply have happened by chance. Just like the case of vitamin C and the case of those 2 students who had copied the spelling mistakes off of each other, this could simply not have happened by chance. We must have inherited this beta globulin cluster from a common ancestor. And again, that must have happened through evolution. Now, I know you're probably getting sick of my analogies, but bear with me for one more. So here's another story. Now, imagine that you're in a class, and there's a big paper due the following morning. And like a good student, you decided to do the paper the night before. So there you are, writing away at 4 a.m. in the morning, and you have gotten 10 pages done, and you're starting to feel a little sleepy. And after a little bit of time, you fall asleep right there while writing your essay. And as you do this, your head and your hands hit your keyboard, and they hit a random sequence of keys, and that randomly inserts a random sequence of letters somewhere in your essay, say in the middle of page 2. And now imagine that I told you that there's some other students who are also doing the same thing. They're sitting there at 4 a.m. in the morning working on their essay. And now what if I told you that some of those students also fell asleep, and as they fell asleep, they hit the exact same sequence of letters with their face and hands, and the exact same sequence of letters inserted into the exact same place, right in the center of page 2 of their essays as well? Could you believe that could happen even one time? Could you think that could be repeated even one time, the exact same sequence of letters being inserted at the exact same place? That's simply impossible. And what if I told you that this has actually happened in biology hundreds of times? And what I mean by that is that there are these things called retroviruses. Retroviruses, they infect a host, and they insert their random well, it's not completely random, but you can take it as mostly random. Their sequence, their DNA into the DNA of the host in a random location. So they insert that, similar to what these students are doing. And it's estimated that 3 to 8% of our DNA is actually made up of these retroviral infections. So there's a lot of examples of that. So here's one specific case, the case of human endogenous retrovirus K. Now this retrovirus accounts for less than 1% of the retroviral DNA that's in humans. So there's a lot more examples where this came from. And there are 14 known sequences in our DNA that came from infection with this retrovirus. And out of those 14, 11 of them are found in the exact same place in the chromosomes of other animals, including what's listed here. There's chimpanzees, gorillas, and other monkeys. So how could this have happened? I just told you that this process could not even have been replicated even once in the case of the students. So how did this happen in biology so many times? And the answer is evolution. What must have happened is these retroviruses must have infected a common ancestor millions of years ago. And that common ancestor then passed on these retroviral infections to its later progeny, which evolved into the various species we know today, like humans, chimpanzees, and gorillas. So in conclusion, the Quran constantly tells the believer to study nature. It repeatedly advises them to study nature. And when you study nature, as hopefully I've been able to convey to you, evolution becomes apparent. Now, small parts about evolution, like which species came first, which species originated from the other species, and how closely different species are related to each other, some of the data there may be questionable. But the whole process of evolution, the idea that we originated from common ancestors and have changed over time, that's an absolute fact. And I hope that I was able to convey that to you today. Jazakallah.
Jazakallah.